And we're live. Hey, all you crazy sci-fi and fantasy fans, it's time for your daily dose of shenanigans over here at the Blasters and Blades podcast. Just three nerdy veterans geeking out over our science fiction passions and fantastical fantasies. A place where magic is king, space is the place, and the sky is the limit. And I totally got that out of order, but yeah, we're going to roll with it. The podcast that puts the fun in dysfunction, and you just saw some of that on display. But without further ado, we are here for one of our famous fireside chats, and I'm going to let you see who's here today. We've got the Brady Bunch panel going, so we're going to let people introduce themselves first. So we've got Michael Gallagher. Can you tell us who you are if people haven't heard of you?
Sure. My name is Mike Gallagher. I just published my debut novel, Body and Blood, this August. And I also write reviews and report on science fiction and fantasy culture and happenings at upstreamreviews.substack.com.
All right. And next, we have Miss Jody Lynn Nye. Can you introduce yourself, please?
I'm Jody Lynn Nye. I write science fiction and fantasy books and short stories. I used to write book recommendations for Galaxy. Oh my God, it's been long enough. Galaxy's Edge magazine, and I'm currently the coordinating judge for the Writers of the Future contest. And I teach writers' workshops at various conventions, especially Dragon Con, where I turn off 20 victims at a time in my 2-day writer workshop.
I'm sure they enjoyed every minute of it. Next, we have Mr. Steve Diamond.
Hey, guys. I'm Steve Diamond. I'm a fantasy, science fiction, and primarily horror author for Bane, Wordfire Press, and a bunch of other people, game companies and stuff. I used to run Elitist Book Reviews. I'm the one that founded that book review site. And so I've written my share of reviews in the past, just once or twice. 1 year I counted all the words I wrote for reviews, and it was like 130,000 words. That was when I realized I should be writing like novels instead, because those. So allegedly. So so here I am. It's good to be back with y'all.
Absolutely, we like having you back. And then we've got Mr. Ben Espin. Wow, I butchered that one. I blame Doc. If you think about it, by being here, it's her fault.
No.
Ben, can you introduce yourself, please?
Of course, Jar. Hi, I'm Ben Espin. I blog at With Both Hands. It's benespin.com. And I probably have one of the more unusual set of interests on the internet. So I write a lot of sci-fi and fantasy reviews, but I've got a whole section of my blog devoted to cyclical theories of history like Oswald Spengler. I like to call it Spengler with a smile. And I also do occasionally, science cocktail party theories, which is the kind of thing you might not write a paper about, but you talk to people about at a party.
Okay. No wonder he's a history nerd like you.
That actually
all
sounds
the cool
super
people are history nerds. All the cool people are history nerds. I don't know what you're talking about, Doc. And then so if you didn't guess, dear listener, because I forgot to tell you, the Fireside Chat topic today is book reviews. We've been meaning to do this since before we rebranded 3 years ago, but life happens. It does that sometimes, and that I'm sure was somehow Doc's fault too, even when it happened before she got on the podcast. But
what?
In absentia, it was her fault.
It's not my fault that I have a life. Wait, no, I don't have a life. So.
Well, you have a convention life that counts. So
I go to conventions and then
allegedly.
I cosplay somebody with a life.
So I'm going to assume that everybody here, if you're writing book reviews, are passionate readers. So we're going to go around the table and I'm going to ask you all, what was your first memory of reading a grown-up novel? Anything sort of YA or higher, chapter books. We'll start with you, Ben. We're going to go round robin.
It might be The King's Fifth by Scott Odell.
Really?
Yeah, it's this really interesting story set in the Spanish Southwest of a guy who's looking for the city of gold.
Was it fiction or nonfiction?
It's fiction, but it's I live here in the American Southwest, and it's he did his research on that one. It's pretty good.
It's very realistic fiction.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and then because I like the circles, we're going to go backwards instead of counterclockwise. We're going to ask Jody. So, what was the first book you remember reading? adult book, I should say, or like chapter book?
Oh, that is very tough to say because I read everything totally indiscriminately, whatever happened to be in the library, whatever happened to be in our house. So it might have been something like I owe Russia $1,200 or whatever happened to be on my mother's bookshelf. A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court. There are a lot of possible suspects, and I'm not sure which one predated what, because I started reading very early. And as I said, I grabbed anything that I could, and if I could sound out the words or I could figure out what they meant in context, I read it.
Okay. What about you, Michael?
Well, the first book I really remember, my dad read voraciously, and he had just boxes and boxes of paperbacks. And I remember just going through a tattered anthology of H.P. Lovecraft stuff and just getting totally hooked by his literature. That was more like an anthology, though. If you want to talk like single title, I remember waiting in line at college for the financial aid office down in New York City, where that sort of thing was like an all-day affair at the beginning of the semester. So I brought along a copy of Fahrenheit 451 and read it while I waited to get up to the window.
Okay. And
I
Steve,
would count it a Lovecraft anthology as adult reading.
yeah, I would.
But like I wasn't sure if like a bunch of short stories counted, so I figured I'd have both
Short
of those.
stories are kind of chapters in of themselves.
Yep.
All
right.
so,
What about you? What about you, Steve?
Ooh. This would have been, late 80s. So probably, I was like 9 or 10. And so it was probably either Book of Three by Lloyd Alexander or, probably, Lion, Witch in the Wardrobe sort of thing, or it was Sword of Shannara. All three of those were kind of at the same time. My mom was a big fantasy reader, and kind of like Jody, it was whatever was on the shelves, right? And so I remember seeing those books on the shelves, and obviously Sword of Shannara was the most impressive because it was giant at the time.
Still pretty big.
It's a big book, and I remember seeing it and thinking, man, I want to read that book someday. And then one day I just pulled it down and started reading it. Probably far too young to be reading some of that stuff. And then right after that, and I went right from Sword of Shannara right into Elfstones, which is probably one of the books that I cite as shaping me into the horror author that I am today. So all that right there.
And Cisca, since you've joined the world of scary book talk on TikTok stuff, all the newfangled kid technology, I'm going to ask you the same question. What was the first grown-up book you remember? I'm going to treat you like a guest today.
My first one is the Anne McCaffrey's The Rowan.
That's a big book. So how old were you when you tackled that?
I was in 6th grade, and I was homesick. My mother thought that I was faking it, so she handed me a book and told me to read the first chapter, and then I could watch TV. For the record, that is a very long book. It's like, at the time, 6th grade, 350 pages, if I recall correctly. There's only 3 chapters in the book.
One of those.
That was an interesting organizational choice.
Power move by mom.
Well, it actually makes sense because part of the original story, and Jody can correct me because she knew Anne better than I did, was originally done as a short story. One of the chapters was originally a short story, which is why I went, an anthology is basically self-standing short chapters, because several of Anne's books started as short stories and moved into novellas. Yes. Though I've never really understood I know there's a length difference, but other than that, I'm female. They kept telling me this was 6 inches in school.
Okay. Gonna be one of those shows. So how did you guys go from, reading those awesome stories to deciding, you know what, I want to review them and share my thoughts with everyone? And we'll start with you in the bottom, Steve, and we'll go clockwise this time.
Well, mine was purely self-interest and selfishness. I decided that I wanted to write, that I wanted to be an author. And I'd been talking to some friends of mine who at the time weren't as intensely popular as they are today, but now are.
Like your famous co-host?
No, like Brandon Sanderson. And because I met him when he and I became friends right when he was nominated for the Campbell Award back in 2006. And so we went to a con together. We went to Worldcon down in LA, and he was there. I was there. He was there. Our friend Dan Wells was there, who turned out to be a fairly big deal author now too. And we were all talking about stuff, and it was right around then that I decided I wanted to be an author. And they said, well, it's pretty rough approaching people at cons and stuff. They hear it from authors all the time. Well, so right after that, I decided to start a book review site. And I figured if it's hard to approach someone at a con, and I saw how it was, I thought, well, maybe if I go up to these same editors, these same publicists, these same authors, and I say, hey, I'm a book reviewer, maybe it'd be an easier in, and then I could wear him down, slowly and surely, like the plague. And then, and sure enough, it worked. I mean, that's how I met Toni Weisskopf over at Baen. I met her through the book review site. And that's how I met Larry Correa, my co-host on Writer Dojo, and my co-author, one of my best friends. That's how I met all these people. And so that's why it was to make these contacts. Basically, I was playing the long con, right?
Okay.
Nicely done.
I can appreciate the hustle. All right. So what about you, Michael?
Mine is, no pressure on a follow-up there. I actually was, I was just about to publish my book. And leading up to it, I had sort of met a couple of superversive guys on social media. One of them was Declan, and we'd kind of befriended each other. I wound up having to delay launching my book for a while, and in the lull that happened there, I was like, look, man, I need to do something. And he's like, well, that's cool, because I happen to run this site and we need more reviewers. So he's like, here's a bunch of books. And it's not very glamorous, but that's just kind of how I fell into it. And I learned a lot through that, and I'm still learning with every e-arc I open.
JR, are you paying attention?
I'm done.
I just forgot I was muted. So Jody, what was it that made you decide to write reviews on your end?
Shahid Mahmood asked me. He was changing his reviewers, and he knew that I read voraciously. My husband also. Bill and I each have our nose in books all the time. So he offered us the gig. So we thought, hey, that would be fun. I guess it was about 8 years ago. We did it for 4 years, and we really enjoyed it. But he actually made us rename our column, because it was supposed to be book reviews, but we never published reviews of something we didn't like. So he said, we have to call it book recommendations from now on, because you're not putting up books that you dislike. And we said, why would we waste column space on books we don't like?
Seems to be a tack a lot of people are taking now, because we actually have a similar policy too. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we've always done that with sci-fi shenanigans and with Blasters and Blades, is because there's enough negative in the world. We don't need to add to it.
Yeah.
We can be constructive and we can be positive.
Well,
so I will say, having been to her house is like a heaven for a book reader. Everywhere you go, there's books.
There are books in every room, literally every room.
Every room. I've checked.
But we have a library downstairs, and lots and lots and lots. But if I were putting reviews online, I might put up some of the books I don't like. But as long as it's being committed to pages, and there are only so many in a magazine, it seemed to be a no-brainer for us.
So we did that as well. We do it partly because if it's a book we don't like, we just generally don't finish it, and it's not really fair to review a book you didn't finish. So that's sort of been our policy too. And like Doc said, there's enough negativity in the world. We have made exceptions, and this gets me hate mail still for an interview review of Starship Troopers I did in 2016. But for classics, I think it's fair.
Excuse me, I have to leave the stream right now.
I made the mistake of saying I thought as an action story that the movie was better than the book. I still get hate. But I never considered Starship Troopers an actual novel. It felt more like a political treatise, which was interesting. I read those too. But anyway, so that's not a bad policy. I think that's probably smart, like, just reviewing the good stuff. But what about you, Ben? So the rest of us, we did it because we were surrounded by the book space, either as writers or Doc with the cons. But you're doing this just out of pure passion. So what drove you to write these reviews?
I think I have in common with everyone else that I'm a voracious reader, and I always have been. So there was a couple of things that came together about 10 years ago that really launched me into being, wanting to be a book reviewer per se. And so the first thing was that I had a friend. His name was John J. Riley. I actually host his blog on mine because he died unexpectedly in 2012. And he had the most interesting book reviews on his website. I loved reading them. So like he was an internet friend. I struck up a conversation with him via email, and then found out that he had died and nobody knew what had happened. And so then the other thing that happened at about that same time is that I went through a process of discovering what kind of books I liked and what kinds of books I didn't. And it took me a long time to kind of figure it out. There had been an extended period of time when I just tried a new author, couldn't find something I liked, tried this other author. I was just flailing in the world of books. And this would have been, the early 2000s. But then I started to kind of figure out what it was that made books I liked something that I would enjoy reading. And as I learned more about that process, I got real passionate about, I want to talk about this. I want to explain this. I want to make it clear that this is what kind of book this is. This is how these stories work. This is why this is interesting. And, it just grew from there.
I've read a lot of yours personally, your reviews. It's somewhere between an academic dissertation like you'd write in college and just like in a regular book review you see on like, I don't know, like a Goodreads or whatever. You sort of blend the two very well. You definitely feel smarter reading them. So well done. Of course, thanks. I will warn you, because we're going to link to your stuff in the show notes. Dear listener, he uses big words, so you might, if you're a grunt like me, you might want to just keep the dictionary handy. It helps. What about you, Doc? So you've recently started doing book reviews over on TikTok with the Dragon Con stuff. So what made you decide to actually start doing that on your own, separate from the podcast? Are you there, Doc?
Looks frozen.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe we put her to sleep. It's always possible. All right. Well, then we'll just let her come back. So, there we go. Let me scroll up to the next question then. So, what is it like? Sometimes when you're doing reviews, you want to be honest with the reader. Like, I'm doing this because they're paying me, or I'm doing this because I got the book free. But how do you personally, when you get your books, how do you generally acquire them? Is this something you're just buying on your own? Is it the author providing it? And any of you feel free to jump in.
Well, upstream, before we moved over to Substack, we had a website that eventually got taken down by WordPress malware, where we had a contact form where you could just sort of submit through the site. And once we'd kind of generated enough of a reputation and word of mouth that now we kind of just get spontaneous submissions through email. Always like with eArcs and stuff like that. But we've been lucky enough to, I guess, get enough of a readership and an email newsletter base that people kind of know about us a little bit now.
Okay. Now that you're back, Doc, I'll go back to the last question real quick, and then we'll circle back. What made you decide to take your book reviews outside of what we were just doing for our podcast and to do them on your own over on TikTok?
Well, okay. Well, first of all, I worked as a Barnes and Noble sales associate for a while, and I got really good at getting quick feedback about books, which sounds like a non sequitur, but it's not, because if you only have 3 minutes to give a book review in a one-on-one talking situation, it becomes much more important to be quick about that. So you get used to referring to things like tropes and age groups, and because you're talking to somebody and trying to get them to understand what it is, particularly because we're going into the holiday season, or I think maybe this is airing right around or afterwards. You don't have a lot of time to tell somebody, this is the book, this is why you want to buy it, or this is why you might not want to buy it. Not to ever turn anybody away from a book, but sometimes you're looking at somebody and going, this book that is super popular right now is really not meant for your age group that you're looking for, type thing. And that's important as a sales associate. When I worked at Barnes and Noble, it was selected as like the most trustworthy book company in the United States at the time. And that was because so many people read books and we got really good at doing them. And then I got into doing the reviews on TikTok because I hate writing. I get very intimidated by writing, and it's easier for me to speak. Go figure. Anybody who's been trapped in a conversation with me can probably vouch for that. And I know how important it is for authors to get reviews. And so this way, it's much easier for me to pick up a phone and do like a 3-minute video on why I like a book and why it's important than it is for me to type it out. And it gets into a different audience than our podcast is doing and stuff like that. So some of it was just branching out and trying it. And I figured if the likes of John Hartness could figure it out, it can't be too impossible.
Fair. So the next question we'll go back to that Michael asked: how do you acquire the books that you're reviewing, Doc? All right, Jody. So how when you were doing your reviews for Galaxy, was it Galaxy's Edge magazine?
Galaxy's Edge, yeah.
So how did you guys get the books that you reviewed?
Well, first and foremost, Shahid forwarded to me and Bill some of the books that we were receiving, that he was receiving for his previous reviewer. So we informed them. Usually there's an email contact someplace that we were now the new book reviewers, so please send your offerings to us. We started to get mailings from them. And once it becomes known that you're doing book reviews, agents and publishers, public relations person, and other people will start to send you queries or sometimes just outright send you books. We would get things in the mail constantly. We were getting Bain books for review, Ace books for review. And for many of the publishing houses, they now don't want to send physical books. So they would send you a link to an e-copy, which was just fine because many of these books we don't ever want to read again once we have read them for the review. And that's fair. That's fine. I'm still getting emails for people who would like to have their books reviewed by us, even though we haven't done it for some time. I forward all of those to the current reviewer for Galaxy's Edge, Richard Twedick. And it's great for people who love books because you get more than you could possibly handle in any month or any period. Galaxy's Edge is published every 2 months. So over the course of 60 days, we would get a lot of books to review, and we would have to choose how many we would handle. And the others frequently got donated to shelters or libraries or anybody else who would want them. And if we didn't want to keep it, also same thing. But anybody who starts to do reviews, you're going to start to hear from people who have books that they want you to review. Individual authors will also come to you and say, I'd like you to consider reviewing my book. What most of them really say is, I've got a book. I want to send you a copy. I want you to review it in the magazine. Okay.
Okay.
It's very hard to review a book for a friend. I don't know if any of you have had the same problem, but the friendship, they want to lean on you and say, we're good friends and I could really use a good review. So not only am I expected to read it, but I'm also expected to like it and tell the world that I like it. So just like I hate to hire friends for jobs, and I hate to be hired by a friend to do a job, the same thing goes for book reviews.
Mm-hmm.
Pass it along to someone that, Steve over here would really love to read your horror book, because actually I don't like horror stories. So he would be a much better choice than I would. So you end up doing favors.
Yeah, that genre match is important. You can tank a book by getting readers that aren't in your genre to read your book and not like it because they don't like that genre.
Right.
It's not something people think about when they start begging for those reviews. It might have been a mistake I made. So what about you, Ben? How do you get the books that you're reviewing? Is it something the author sends you, or are you buying them yourself, the library? How do you get the books?
I mean, any and all of those sources. So I've certainly used my personal library or things that I've just acquired because I like it. Sometimes I will search things out through a library in case that's, I don't feel like buying a book at this point, or I'm relatively certain I don't want to keep it. I'm rather proud of my library, so what goes in there matters a lot to me. But I'm also somewhat space limited. I think I've got 800 or 900 books in the house right now, and that's,
Oh, good God.
by some standards that's not a lot, and by some standards that's way too many. So it just depends on who you ask, I think. But yeah,
Or if you're going to move.
I'm a little space limited on that. Yeah, moving all those books would suck.
Our movers
Suck a whole bunch.
I want to interrupt just for a moment to include something I just forgot. Netgalley.com. You can sign up if you are a reviewer, and they have up and coming books, some of them only a month away, some of them 6 months in the future. And in many genres, you sign up for the ones you can, and you explain who you are. If you are a reviewer and you sign up, you'll get more chances of being approved for getting a review copy of a book that you want to read. If you have a place that you can put up a review that will do the publisher and the author some good. So NetGalley is a great location for getting brand new books, the ones that are just about to come out.
And if I'm not mistaken, with NetGalley on the author side, if I understand correctly, they have to make a pretty substantial commitment financially to get their work listed. Isn't that also correct? So there may be a little bit of a higher quality that gets into NetGalley, do you think?
Well, they're only, and I'm going to say this, and I'm sorry for the way it comes across, real publishers, like generally legacy publishers.
Okay.
St. Martin's, Simon & Schuster, Ace, Berkeley, the ones that have an established legacy. I haven't seen small press on there yet, except
I apologize. I don't know why I was under the impression that like individuals could list their books on there.
NetGalley, I don't know.
Thought I had seen a video or something, but maybe I'm wrong.
Okay.
So never mind. Sorry.
It's okay. So Ben, so you just you find them in all the places. Is there any unusual place you found a book that you reviewed?
Oh, that's a good question. I think there might have been a few I've stumbled across, like I saw it at somebody else's house, or like I found it in the trash. Like there's definitely been at least a couple that were like that. But it's also mostly the usual ways. Like I've certainly got relationships with some independent publishers. When Silver Empire still existed, I had a relationship with that publisher where they gave me copies of their books and I reviewed them. And I liked a lot of their stuff, so I was pretty happy to do that. So it's a real mix for me. Some of them are things that a publisher will send to me, an individual author will send to me. Like I get the random emails as well. And then there's been things like, here's something I want to go seek out. Especially when I'm trying to round out a specific bit of genre history, I'll often go looking for a specific author. I want to go read this book because it influenced these other authors, and I'm going to go do a historical retrospective. So there's a little bit of everything across the board.
Okay. What about you, Steve? I know you once read 200 book reviews a year at one point in time. I remember you saying once. That can't be cheap if you're buying all of them. So how are you acquiring the books that you were reviewing?
In the beginning, it was, by hook or by crook, right? Like it was whatever I had. In the beginning, like you can say you're a reviewer, but no one's going to believe you, and no one cares. So, so it was just writing reviews based on books that I liked, or in the very beginning, really big books that I hated. And if the author was enormous, and had like their own gravity well, doesn't matter what you say, right?
Right.
Like, but a few tiers, just a few tiers down from that, it matters what you said. And I adopted the don't say mean things rule later in life, especially once I realized that I was getting in front of people that I liked.
Doc, you're muted.
You mean it?
Sorry. Constructive versus negative are two different things.
Oh, indeed. But I was negative
Always understand that. But that
because I hate everybody. Equally.
I can relate to that. I can relate to that.
But so I just started with whatever, right? And I'd either buy the books. At the time I was working at a Walden Books, and so I could borrow any book I wanted, and I could I could easily get at a massive discount some other books, and so those were the good old days. But after that, I went to a couple conventions, introduced myself, and pretty quick told them I was a reviewer, showed them the website, and then pretty much every publicist under the sun contacted me. And so I had, like the 38 publicists that Tor had at the time, they all contacted me at once. Orbit, Bane,
Wow.
Ace Rock, whatever, St. Martin's. And then of course, very, very, very occasionally Daw. But at the time, Pyre was still a big deal, and they mattered back when Lou Anders was there. And they basically were hungry for reviewers. And so they sent me a catalog, and they just said, well, how many of each of our books do you want? I'm like, I only need one. But they literally sent me a box of everything, of their entire catalog.
Wow.
And
Nice.
book slut in me is very jealous right now.
It was
I was
awesome,
thinking the same thing.
It was great. Got a bunch of, had a bunch of old Mike Resnick books and stuff from when he published with them. And, a bunch of the, Joe Abercrombie's, his stuff. Their whole deal was they were starting to publish stuff from over in the UK, over in the US initially. And so I was reading all that stuff, James Barclay, Joe Abercrombie, and Tom Lloyd, and these guys who were just amazing authors. Mm-hmm. And so I would read all those, and then at a certain point, you kind of get critical mass, and you snowball all the way down the hill. And then next thing you know, like you look like a hoarder from a movie, and you've got just like stacks of books everywhere. They send you the like the uncorrected proof, right? And then the book would publish, and then they'd send you the final copy. And so I'm like, well, what am I supposed to do with both of these? Like, well, I don't know what to do anymore.
Some of David Weber's final copies were very different than the original.
Oh yeah. But, and so I would, so I ended up donating a lot of books or whatever. So many books, like thousands of books. I ended up donating.
So when did your wife hit critical mass and say, no, you're going to give some of these away? Like, was it 1,000, 2,000?
Like 15 minutes in,
Yeah, I understand. I've been there.
She's like, oh crap, we got to move. This sucks. In fact, when I moved into this house that I'm in now, I hadn't done a really good purge of books. I still had, this was only like 8 years ago, and I still had tons of books from this review stuff, which I haven't done in a long time now. But Larry Correa was helping me move, and after that, he's like, dude, it's a good thing we're friends. He's like, I'm never doing this again.
Boxes of books are the worst part of any move.
They're so freaking heavy. It was like 100 boxes of books just filled and filled.
When we moved, my husband packed all the boxes. We gave 13 boxes to OSO before we left. We packed onto the truck 330 boxes of books. And when we got here, we gave a lot to one of the public libraries. And we've acquired more. It just keeps happening. So a friend of mine who used to open Borders bookstores, I said, we're moving the equivalent of a small public library. And she said, how many boxes? That would be 37 skids. No, you're moving the equivalent of a medium-sized public library.
Wow.
that's I'm kind of jealous though.
Her
So.
house was heaven for a book lover, right?
Yeah. So I've never actually, so I've always just bought my own reviews or used Kindle Unlimited or my Audible credits when that was still, in the budget. And I haven't yet, I guess I haven't reached critical mass because no one has ever said, hey, I'll give you a free book if you review it. But I do what's in my genre because that's what I like to read anyway. So what about you, Doc? Before we play the commercial, how did you acquire the books you did for your book talk? Talk, whatever.
A lot of them are books that I have read already or were given to me. So, and actually very sweet.
Oh, there she goes.
All right. So there goes her internet again. She really needs to get fiber optic and none of this like tin can thing she's doing. But in the meantime, we're going to pause for a moment while we shamelessly shill for the man. Thank you, Steve.
The war between Al Nassia and the Empire of Kolakovia is in its 100th year. Casualties grow on both sides as the conflict leaves no corner of the world untouched. Ilarion Glaskov's quiet life on the fringes of the Empire is thrown into chaos when an impossible tragedy strikes his village. When he is conscripted into the Tsarist military, he is sent to serve in The Wall, an elite regiment that pilots suits of armors made from the husks of dead golems. But the Great War is not the only, or even the worst, danger facing Ilarion, as he is caught in a millennia-old conflict between two goddesses. He must survive the ravages of trench warfare, horrific monsters from another world, and the treacherous internal politics of the country he serves. Servants of War, new military fantasy by Master of Horror Steve Diamond and international bestseller Larry Correia. Available on Amazon or wherever fine books are sold. Pick up your copy today.
So I had to use that ad, Steve. I couldn't help myself. So
I can get behind an ad like that every day.
Yeah, the funny one is the one Bane sent me where they mispronounced Bane and they said Bean. The narrator. I actually used that commercial. It was Larry Correia's gun runner, I think, the one with John Brown. And Tony was on the episode. We aired that, and she started laughing. It was hysterical.
How do you say bean?
I don't know. So, hey, the commercial was otherwise awesome. So I say we just leave it, and people that know will laugh, and people that don't will never know. So we've talked about like what we review and sort of how we get them. Do you guys feel that it is important to disclose to your reviewing public, the people that are reading the reviews, where those books came from in transparency, or do you just, this is the book, this is my review? I know for me, I always tell them. I always say I bought it.
I always say this is where I got it from.
Right up front with the readers that I had, with the reader base that we had for elitist book reviews, we always just said, hey, look, we're not getting paid for any of this, but we're getting comp the copies. So publishers are sending them to us, or maybe the author is, and that's all we say. Like, there's no use belaboring the point. I mean, if you do happen to be getting paid, like it's like a paid sponsorship for some reason, yeah, you better disclose that. But otherwise, most people don't care.
Okay. What about you, Jody? You guys were actually getting paid for the reviews, but not by the authors, right?
It was a very small sum. Clearly, the free books were one of the means of remuneration.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't believe that we ever reviewed a book that was already in our library. Copies, like I said, that they came from everywhere. They came from various publishers, they came from publicists, they came from fellow authors, and some were passed along to us from Galaxy's Edge's office because they arrived there instead of on our doorstep. As we were employed contractually by the magazine, I don't think anyone cared where we got them from.
Okay. What about you, Michael, for your upstream reviews? Do you guys buy those yourself?
No, I don't think I don't believe we disclosed if we got like a free e-arc or something from Bane's always been very generous with their arcs. To a fault almost. But like we've always said very upfront, like, yes, you can give us books, there's a submission form, just fire away, we'll take it. And we weren't with the magazine or anything, we were just the site as it was, and people just kind of I would sort of, it was kind of like more of a private thing where we would tell the authors, if it was like an individual author, like, look, if we don't like the book, we're not gonna post a review because we don't want to tear anybody down, but just know if you don't hear anything. And I've actually only ever had one person email me back asking where their review was, but yeah, it was pretty upfront, and nobody ever really was too curious about it.
Okay. Yeah, that works. So now the next question we're going to get into deep. So do you guys, you've mentioned that, Jody, that you got some of yours before they were published, but is that the norm for people? Are you guys getting your pre-published books? Or
Yeah,
that's
the whole idea. Every publisher wants a big first day because these are all reported to, like, the New York Times, and it matters to have a big day. So a favorable review that is out there early will help drive the sales for the first day. They really want to have at least the first week for the day it gets reported. There are shockingly few bookstores that are on the New York Times list from which they compile it, and they want the most sales that they can get in that first week. So NetGalley and other things like that are very important. And when editors send the books out to reviewers, they want those reviews on the street before the book actually hits, or concurrently with the first day of publication.
okay. Now, is that only an option for the print or ebook, or do they do that for audio as well?
I couldn't say.
Okay, that's fair.
Generally, it was all kind of at the same time. The goal of most publishers is to have the audiobook released at the same time as your Dead Tree copies, right? Or your e-copies. But rarely did I receive any audiobooks to review. It was almost always just the regular books.
We never did.
Yeah, I did a couple times, but it was a little weird, and I never went that route. Always felt, I don't know, I felt like I was having to review. They were adding an extra variable to the mix when they did that, because no matter how good the book is, if the narrator's garbage, then the book's garbage, right? Like,
fair.
But yeah, we always got our books well ahead of time. Sometimes months and months ahead of time, but with places like Tor, and if I remember who else, there were a couple places that had pretty strict embargoes that they said, try not to post this review until 2 weeks before the publication date at the earliest. Because like Jody said, they want maximum impact all at once. And so oftentimes you would have a review, and then you would have an interview with said author kind of hit it the same day, so that everything kind of hit together. That was always the best. But yeah, getting the books well in advance was nice. That was a pretty sweet perk. There's not a whole lot better than getting like the new Joe Abercrombie book like 3 months ahead of time. And you're like, suckers, I already read that.
Okay. So when we're writing those reviews, do you guys feel like there's an optimal length for the reviews? I've seen some that are sort of like a paragraph, which to me seems woefully inadequate, and then mine have sometimes been 5,000 words. So is there like a sweet spot, you think, for length for these reviews?
I think more than a few paragraphs, you're going to start losing people. Give them your impression, give them an idea of the plot, tell them what kind of genre it is. You're really, it's a selling copy. So you want it to be like an advertisement in a way of what is it you loved about it? What is it that will interest the reader? What kind of reader is going to be attracted to it? And we also put in our reviews what kind of age group it would be appropriate for, because we would get young adult and middle school books as well sometimes. There were books that were very much all weapons, all shoot 'em up. Larry's fans would have loved them, or this is something that Patricia Briggs fans would like. They're not usually the same market, and that's fine. Trying to find the right people who would enjoy the book and give them enough information to go with that. Rarely did a book merit an essay of 2 or 3 long pages.
Okay. What about you, Michael?
I don't think I could write a review at less than 1,000 words with a gun to my head. But one of the nice things about how we did things at Upstream Reviews is we kind of divided, basically 5 different categories: the more or less a plot synopsis, the characters, the world, the politics, and who would like this book. And so in there you get kind of 200-300 word chunks that are a lot more manageable at once. And if something I thought was just really exceptional, I think the biggest review I've ever written was something like 1,800 words. That's really going on. But yeah, somewhere around about 1,000, 1,200 words, divided up into about 5 or 6 different parts.
Okay. What about you when you were writing, Steve? How long were yours? I don't think I've ever read any of your reviews.
Oh, that's fine. You don't need to do any of that stuff. Those
I'm not a good
reviews
host today. I should have.
those reviews are
stalked you
old
better.
times. Yeah, it was probably, gosh, it was probably right around the same as Mike's. If I got really, really excited or enthusiastic about something, that review would get long just because I couldn't stop talking about it.
Yeah.
I got so excited about it or whatever. I read I remember reading the last few Stephen Erickson novels in the Malazan series, and I just thought, and I was just so I was so beyond into those books that I just couldn't stop talking about them. Or if a book kind of came out of nowhere and surprised me, I loved talking about those sorts of books. Or if I hated the novel, man, I could go on for ages. I could go on for ages about that book, for better or worse. But in general, probably right around the 1,000-word mark was where I tried to hit.
Mhm.
And like Jody was talking about, we talked, a little bit, why we did or didn't like the book. Usually why we did like the book, why we thought it was awesome.
Mhm.
The random stuff about characters and stuff. But then at the end, we always had a little block where we talked about who it was recommended for, whether we're talking about, like a specific audience, or we talked about, okay, what age do we think you should be? What kind of content is there in terms of language, violence, and sex?
Right.
We put all those in, and at first we got some grief about it, but I think people really started to like that because it gave them within. I mean, each thing was just a line, all 4 of those categories: age, language, violence, sex, and we just put it in there, and people really gravitated towards that. It gave them a really quick thing. Didn't matter whether or not they actually cared about any of those ratings, but it just kind of primed the pump, and they knew what they were getting into one way or the other. Didn't matter whether they liked it or not. It was nice.
Okay. What about you, Ben? I've read a lot of yours are a little bit on the longer, but you tend to look at some of the philosophical underpinnings that you took from the stories.
I do.
Do you have an optimal length when you're writing yours?
It's more of a feel thing than a specific word count that I'm really aiming for. I probably vary somewhere in the the 500 to 2,000 words. Like there's been some that have been real long, and I was thinking about it while everyone else was talking, and I'm not a very effective cog in the corporate advertising machine if the objective is to move a lot of books. Because a lot of times, I suspect I do lose a certain amount of the audience. You're like, I'm not writing a book review all the time with the audience of kind of the broader public in mind. Sometimes it's just me, and this is what I think about. And if I wanted to reach that broader audience, I would have to adjust my voice and I would have to adjust my length to compensate. But I don't want to, because that's not what I'm doing. What I'm doing is something that's kind of a blend of that more marketing style book review that the world depends on. The world of authors and publishers really depends on to get word out, and me just wanting to play with ideas and explore things and talk about stuff that I think is really awesome. And then sometimes that tends to get a little long, and I've certainly had people I know read a book review I've written and tell me, man, Ben, I had no idea what you were talking about. It was really cool, but yeah, I don't know.
Okay.
Dude,
So let's talk
you have like picture references in your reviews.
I do. I
Good
love
heavens.
finding just the right image to illustrate the concept I'm talking about. I'm a physicist. I went to school for physics and math. It's kind of funny that I review books for fun. But I like being able to visualize a concept, and so I will spend as much time searching for the perfect image as I will writing it.
Freaking overachiever.
I love pictures.
Actually, Jared, do you mind if I pose a quick question to the other?
Not at all.
Guess here, I'm just really curious about you guys. How far into a book will you give a book before you decide if you're going to go ahead and do a review, or if you say, okay, I've given this thing enough of a chance, I'm just going to cut bait and DNF it here? How long does an author have before they've lost you or they have a chance to keep you? For me, it's the first chapter. Like, if you haven't hooked me in with the premise or the style or anything like that of the characters, if I don't care about the characters or the story by the end of the first chapter, I'm probably done if I've got a big pile waiting for me.
I mean, I've always got a big pile waiting for me, so I probably tend to the shorter side myself. And I mean, I think I would probably give an author at least till the first chapter. But the reality of it is, a really good book often hooks you in the first paragraph.
Yeah.
Or even the first sentence. There's some great examples in the world of that.
Oh yeah.
But I won't necessarily. I'm not going to cut somebody loose over a paragraph. That's not
right.
That's not how I do things. But if it's not picked up by the end of the first chapter, I agree with you, Michael. That's probably when I'm going to put that aside and go look for something else.
So what about you, Steve? What is your line?
Oh man, I don't. When I reviewed books, because my stance now is slightly different, but when I reviewed professionally, whatever the freak that means, that line was in the sand. It changed every book every day, because I tried really hard to, even if say the first chapter wasn't engaging to me, I had to ask myself, okay, well, I'm reading this book. Am I being fair if I just chuck this book over my shoulder? Or can I read this book and figure out who its primary audience actually is, and then figure out how to recommend the book to that audience? And that did a couple things for me. One, I think it made me a better reader, because it kind of rounded me out. You guys know this from getting like review copies, but sometimes like the advanced bound manuscripts, the ABMs, they're like, it's just a blank cover with like words on it that says like book, and
it's the no frills edition.
Yeah. And you get those, and sometimes you have no idea what those are. And you have this giant pile of books, and sometimes you look at a cover and you're just like, no, I'm not even reading that. Screw that book. Or you get the ones you're like, oh, sweet, swords and stuff, yay! And then you read those ones. But then you get the advanced band manuscripts were like, it was like a blind box. You're not never quite sure what you're going to get. Mm-hmm. So I would read those on occasionally. I wouldn't read the back of it. I wouldn't read anything about it, and I just start. And I discovered an author who I love that way, and I became friends with her. Her name's Marie Brennan. And I read this book, and I was not the target audience. It was like fairies and stuff. And I'm not that guy, unless they're eating you, right? But I'm not that guy. But I read the book, and I loved her way of writing, and I loved everything about it. And I think if I had have gone into that book knowing what it was about, and just read the first chapter and said, oh, well, this isn't for me, I would have missed out on something. And so I give authors a lot of grace that way. And because I don't like it doesn't mean someone else will. And now as an author, I have to hope that reviewers out there are doing the same for me, that even they'll say, oh, well, you know what, this weird, dark horror military fantasy thing, that's not really my thing, but I'll read it anyway and give it a shot. And maybe I can figure out who its audience is. Right. And so that was my thing. I don't know. Maybe that's a little too touchy feely for a horror guy, but whatever.
So when I do mine, because I'm paying for all of mine, because I haven't reached the point where anyone's sending me free stuff, which is fine. I tend to give it whatever that. Sure. That would be my first. I tend to give it that 10% sample that you get on Amazon, because before I buy it, I tend to read that. So that works for me. I figure if you haven't got me in 10% of the book, because I know it's an exact percentage over on Amazon, then I figure, I probably am not going to like it, so I don't buy it. I'm a little more forgiving if it's on Kindle Unlimited, because it's sort of like a digital library. But since I've had to cut that out, I've found books that weren't in the system that I'm enjoying as much. So I'll probably just stick with the first chapter. That's not a bad question. I wish I thought of it, Michael.
I am here to hijack the stream.
Absolutely. You're doing great. So how do you grade them when you write yours? Do you just use the 5-star system that everyone uses, or do you have some gradient thereof? How are you guys reviewing them? Like what scale are you using?
Basically, if it appears on the site, we thought it was good. We don't really have a specific scale or rating system now.
Okay.
It's more nebulous. It was like,
it's a tough thing to quantify,
awesome? Yeah. It's like, do we think it's awesome? Cool. Like, do we think that it's like going to cause our eyes to bleed? Then that's a different thing. But I
if
stopped
horror,
reading.
that might be a bonus.
I know,
yeah.
And I don't mean good way, bad way, eyes bleeding. Just kind of depends, right? So yeah, for us at Alita's Book Reviews, back when I was there, it was books we loved, books we thought were okay, and books we didn't like. That was it.
Yeah.
Nothing crazy.
Okay.
We didn't.
What about you, Ben? Oh, you didn't use the system, Jody?
No, if it appeared in the column, it was favorable.
Okay. What about you, Ben? How do you categorize those when you're reviewing them?
I've tried a few different things. I tried star systems for a while, but I found that I didn't really like it. It didn't get at what I wanted to talk about. So for the most part, I've abandoned it. Although weirdly, I do maintain the 0 to 5 star system for short stories. And I don't know why I do that, but I like doing it for short stories for some reason. But I don't do it for anything longer than that. And so that's just a kind of an idiosyncrasy of my style for some reason. But for the most part, it's similar of, if I'm talking about a book, it's because I find it interesting. Every so often, it's like, I hate this book, but it's interesting, or this book was really boring, but it was still interesting, which sounds like a contradiction, but it's not.
Yeah, I was going to ask, what is a boring yet interesting book? What is that like?
The Well at World's End by William Morris. Fantasy book written 100 years ago, and the style is incredibly painful by my standards, but it's just written in a completely different idiom. And if you can, it's kind of like what Steve was getting at. If you can get your brain into this is why this made sense, and you can read it and understand. And then I read that book, and I'm like, oh man, there's like 50 authors I've read who read this book and thought it was cool and wrote something based on their experience of reading this. That's why I read this book. But like, if you gave that book to like a random fantasy reader today, they'd be like, what is this? And chuck it. But no chance. It's slow, slow. But that's just how they wrote books back then.
Yeah. I've two or three times I remember I've slogged through like 100 pages of a book that either was like mostly really well written or had an amazing premise or a great first chapter, and then just fell off a cliff before I just finally had to decide I can't do this anymore and nothing's gonna happen. And then I've so yeah, I guess we've all kind of had those books where it sort of dragged us for a while.
Books
Longer than we
Dude, I've read series like that.
Yeah, you got your coat caught in the car door, and it just dragged you along.
Yeah.
There are too many times. Reviewing books actually was good training for me for what I'm doing now with the Writers of the Future contest, because so many of the books that we looked at that were rejected for review were what we now call failure to launch, because it took so long. If it takes longer than the first chapter, I am not going to even bother to write a review of it.
Wow.
And one I call prose versus plot, where they are so in love with their storytelling style that it completely obscures whatever they were trying to get at. Now, I understand that if I'm reading a novel that was written in history or written in the style of that, like Georgette Hare or Master and Commander, authors escaping my mind right now.
Patrick O'Brien.
Patrick
O'Brien. Yeah. They are meant to sound like they were from
supposed to be like that.
Right.
Yes, they're supposed to be like that, and I'm going to ride with that. But if it is somebody who fell in love with their thesaurus and cannot leave it alone, you have to walk away from it, because it's just not going to be of interest to as many people as the publisher hopes it will. I don't want to have to fight to figure out what's going on.
It sounds like something that I was on another podcast with an editor of mine named Eric Postma. It sounds like what he would call well-written crap.
So we've talked about sort of what we put in the reviews, your thoughts on it. How do you guys feel about spoilers in your reviews? Do you avoid them like the plague, or are you shamefully willing to put them in?
I'm shameful.
Or shamelessly, I should say.
I will spoil the stuff out of a book if I feel like it. And I have I don't want to ruin a book for anybody. Like, I know that some people really want to like experience those things for the first time, and I try to respect that. But just the way I talk about books, it works a lot better sometimes if I can spoil it. So there's actually been cases where I've written 2 reviews. There's the spoiler-free one and the spoiler-full one, and the spoiler-full one is always more fun for me. But I try to at least give people a fair warning that I'm just going to like lay all this out there. Or sometimes it's a book that it's 50 years old and I'm going to spoil it, and if you don't know what happens, I'm sorry.
Well, yeah.
Yeah,
that's fair.
It's a bigger deal if I'm getting something that's like, this is an ER, it's a new release book, it's coming out in 2 months. Like, then I feel a little bit differently about ruining it for people. Whereas like I'm reviewing a classic of the genre, then I just let it all hang out there, so that I have a different policy depending on what kind of book it is.
That's fair. That's fair. That's a pretty good way of doing it. If it's a new book, I won't spoil anything. I just won't. I mean, I like that magic too much, and I know that readers like that magic too much. But like you said, Ben, I agree with you. If it's something older, then man, like the whole critical analysis of why it mattered, why it was important, why I think it still matters or doesn't matter today.
Then you got to talk about it.
Yeah, you can't get around that without spoiling
Yeah.
it. I wrote this review for True Grit a while back, when the new movie came out, and I did this weird review where I compared the old John Wayne movie versus the new movie versus the book, and I talked about the pluses and minuses to all of it and stuff,
Yeah.
and you can't do that without spoiling what it's about. And I'm like,
Yeah.
look, if you haven't seen the old John Wayne True Grit movie, then I'm sorry, I got nothing for you. Like
Yeah.
you can just go away now.
That's on you.
Yeah, exactly. And the book is older than that. I mean,
Yeah.
good grief. And that book is a classic Western. It's one of the best Westerns ever written.
Yeah.
And so, you see
That's
these
got to be
things.
one of the only novels that was amazing as a novel, and then was amazing as a movie adaptation, and then was amazing again as the second adaptation. I don't know any other series of adaptations where it's been that consistently
Just
good.
keeps being awesome.
Just speaks to
it's
the
always
strength of
awesome.
the story, frankly, when it goes out.
It was always awesome. And so, yeah, I agree with you. Ben.
So what about you, Jody? When you were writing your reviews, did you spoil them or did you try to avoid them?
We didn't spoil anything, but we used clickbait. We leave
You
them up.
won't believe.
You won't believe what comes next. But we wouldn't spoil, because that's not fair. It was before. They were always before the books came out. Sometimes weeks, sometimes months, and it's not fair to have that magic dispelled. It just isn't. The author did such a good job of it. We want them to enjoy it, and if we can leave them quivering to the point just before the fabulous revelation, that just, in my opinion, adds to the anticipation. But no spoilers. Let that come later.
Okay.
Generally, we try not to spoil anything, and I've actually found something that I've actually found out fairly recently, and I don't know how true this is for you guys, was that in terms of details, I only really have to give the reader of the review probably the first third or so of the book until the plot really starts to kick in. And then after that, you can probably just leave the rest out, because by then they kind of know what they're walking into. Unless you tell them, yeah, there's going to be a sledgehammer of a twist at the end or something like that. I did a review for a book called Fallen by a great debut author named Patrick Abbott. He served in Afghanistan. He wrote this amazing science, military sci-fi book. I can't believe it's a debut novel, frankly. That wrestles with things like PTSD and all this stuff, and he used a bunch of his friends as sort of influences, and it's really touching stories. I actually got to talk to him back and forth. Great guy, and he really drew out of a lot of some really deep experiences. And he wrote this great book, and it's 516 pages. And I only had to probably, yeah, I know, and it sounds like a doorstopper, but you will fly through it. But I probably only had to reveal characters and stuff from probably the first 100. Before I could then talk about the strengths of the overall story and the mega themes of the book, and leave enough for the reader to have their appetite whet and not really give too much of the magic away, I think.
Okay, that's fair. So I know we're running tight on time, and we're trying to do better at time management. I'm failing miserably, but so I'm gonna leave us with two questions. So the first one is, do you worry that if it seems like a lot of people's policy these days, or if I don't like a book, I'm not reviewing it? Do you worry that by only having book reviews out there that are glowing, that we're potentially inflating the system? That was Doc's question. I wish she was here to better explain what she wanted by that. But she's complained a little bit sometimes, if you've listened to the show, about the way the star system, for example, works on some of the publishing websites, and she thinks sometimes that those sort of inflate the numbers, so bad books get favorably rated to a point where people get suckered into buying something they wouldn't otherwise.
That's part of why I don't use star ratings.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Because I actually do suspect that to be the case. And in general, I think part of my answer to that is that I do sometimes include a more critical review. And Doc talked a little bit about the difference between being negative and being constructive, and sometimes you do have to be a little bit destructive every so often. And I've certainly written a couple of things that were a little spicy, I definitely remember ruining somebody's day on Twitter about 6 months ago by trashing a very famous author that he was going to be talking about like on a podcast later that week. And I felt real bad, and I told him sorry, but but I also like I meant what I said.
Right.
Sorry, not sorry.
Sorry, not sorry. Like I
Right,
didn't
right.
want to.
Well,
I didn't want to hurt his
welcome to the
feelings,
jungle.
but I wanted to trash the author. Yeah, but like
Now, were you-
that was a dead person I was trashing, so it's a little different, right? It's
My
Right.
God, Ben.
Excuse me.
If he
So, yeah.
responds, you're in trouble.
If you're if Bradbury comes and tells me that I'm full of it, I've got other problems.
Oh, he can take
Yeah.
it. Bradbury can take it.
His reputation is fine. What I say about him doesn't matter.
So what about the rest of you? Do you feel like that we're potentially inflating the system that might prop up bad books by only reviewing stuff we liked, or like what do you guys have thoughts on that?
In terms of upstream, I think one of the things we try to focus on is we do review a lots of like mass market stuff from like Bane and I guess Tor and stuff like that. But we really try to put a lot of the focus on good indie authors, like people that really need the exposure and could use the exposure, and who like a good legit review would really help. So the people that we're trying to elevate, I think, are the folks who are definitely not in danger of being overinflated to start with.
Okay.
Boy, I don't know. That's a tough question.
Yeah.
I think I can argue both sides of that, which makes it a good question, right?
Right.
Like I can certainly see how if we're only ever doing positive reviews, how a book could unintentionally or intentionally lead readers astray. I mean, I've certainly read books that have these just absurd, like absurdly good reviews. And I read the book and I'm like, yeah, I don't know about that one. This one feels like some bad reviews got deleted mysteriously. Those ones mysteriously vanished in a boating accident with my guns. So I can totally see that. On the flip side, though, like as an author, brother, give me all those good reviews. Every single good review. And
it matters.
And if those bad
it matters
reviews
to
get
authors.
and if those bad reviews get lost in the boating accident, good riddance.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I feel like I'm playing both sides on that one.
So did you have any thoughts on this, Jody?
Absolutely. I don't think that there's going to be a rebalancing, because why would bad books deserve to be reviewed when people's time is short?
Mhm.
It's like the Writing Excuses podcast. It's 15 minutes because you're busy, and that's fine. Which I think is the intro for any kind of program. But the point is, do bad books deserve a review on anything except Amazon? Not everybody deserves a participation trophy. I hate the inflation of giving out kudos to people just because they showed up. It's really an insult to them, because then they don't have a chance to mature. Why can't I get noticed? Because we read your book and it still needs work. If someone was to say to me, did you read my book? Yes, I did. Here are the things I liked about it. Other than that, I'm not going to render them in print, because there were things that I liked better, that I thought deserved the column space.
Well, and
That's fair.
And to even go off that a little bit further, the five of us, or if Doc was here, 6 of us, we think about things differently. We either have or had our own sites, and that's a very different mindset than the Twitter mob, or than random Joe Schmo book reviewer on Amazon who has internet anonymity. It doesn't matter. They're going to post their review no matter what, and they're going to be idiotically, stupidly honest. They're going to be like, "Oh, the book wasn't delivered to me in wrapped by angelic cherubs delivering it to me with Mountain Dew on the side." Like they're just gonna if the book arrives with so much as a scratch, it's a 1-star review, even if they think it's the best book they've ever read. And so I can argue on the flip side of this and say, while people like us are more critical and we have our rules, right? Mm-hmm. There, for the vast majority of people, there are no rules. It's the Wild West. They can do whatever the freak they want, and they will.
Yeah.
And so I do think that in some manner it will balance out.
Okay.
Because a lot of people on the other side, it's like folks do give a lot of credence to the people who write Amazon reviews, and yet not, right?
Oh yeah.
So
Schrodinger's review. It's bad and it's good at the same time.
Yeah, and then you get those. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. The problem with the Amazon reviews is that they're only looking at the number of reviews that a book gets, not how good they are or how thoughtful. Oh, and because they want 50 reviews before they start promoting it, it doesn't matter what's in the reviews, really.
Yeah.
And that's we are trying to do it on a professional or semi-professional level, based on the fact that we're also writers and we have read hundreds, if not thousands, of books. So for somebody who says, this is the first science fiction book I ever read, I think it's awesome, I'm giving it 5 stars, even though it's the rest of us will look at it and say, needed one more pass through the
what is it?
So I know that sometimes, like, even this is the difference between being negative and being constructive we talked about earlier, but sometimes what some people list as a bad thing, like this had too much cussing, I'm like, wait, okay, the infantry in me says that's good. Or I had one, like, if Amazon's policy would have let me, the negative review would have been my ad campaign. It's like a 12-year-old with ADD wrote gun porn. I'm like, oh dude, like, you can be my manager. So like, I think sometimes, that they're so subjective that what one person is hating about a book, other people are loving. When we used to do our interviews before we got rid of it, because it was just time consuming, we would talk about with the author about the reviews they would get, and we'd pull some of the good and some of the bad and talk about themes. And I was always surprised at the number of, this was the part of the book and it made the book horrible. And then somebody else would take that same thing and be like, this is what I loved about it. So I think there's,
that happens a lot with Larry Correa. That happens a lot with Declan Finn, I'm sure.
Yeah.
One of Larry's favorite reviews was someone told me he wrote like a modern Robert E. Howard. And he's like,
oh, sick burn.
Yeah, please.
Wow.
He's like, that's the best review I've ever gotten. It was a 1-star.
Yeah, thanks.
Right.
Yeah, right.
Like I remember one of my reviews said that my YA novel Residue, they were complaining because it didn't have enough sex in it. And I'm like,
oh my God.
Well,
that is
sweet.
The state. That is the state of young adult literature right there.
Oh
my
yeah,
God.
It's a complete.
That's another Fireside chat.
That's a whole other Fireside chat.
Dude, you should totally do that, JR. Because man, block off 3 hours for that. Because I'm sure plenty of us could have some opinions on YA right now.
Well, or like so many of us have said before, reviews become very subjective. For Servants of War, which was the ad that you all heard in the middle of the show, we had like back-to-back reviews where one was like, this is the best thing I've ever read and it's wonderful, and in the next review, and it was really dark and it was really violent, but it was hopeful, it was the best thing ever. And I'm like, man, this is great. And then the next review was, wasn't dark enough, not enough rats eating people. Like, oh crap.
Wow.
Of all the books I've ever read in my life, this is one of them.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So, you never know. You just never know.
so we tend to gear our podcast towards the consumers of the product, so the listeners and reviewers, or the listeners and readers of science fiction or speculative fiction writ large now. But we do have authors that listen. So is there any etiquette that you think these people really need to know to do when they're approaching you for a review? I haven't actually been approached yet, but I can imagine there have been some entitled horror stories, and then the flip side of someone who did it just right. So what is the etiquette, do you think, of someone approaching you to review their book?
There's a couple of things that people do ask. When I was writing reviews, and even when I wasn't, they'll come to you and ask for a review, or they'll ask for a blurb. And it's a delicate balance, because if you read it and you love it, that makes it really easy. But if you read it and you didn't love it, or that you thought that they went off the rails, or they didn't complete their thought, it's really hard to handle that. And I wish there was a better way to do it than say, I'm sorry, I didn't have room in this month's column, or I got too busy, I couldn't write you a blurb. I'm sorry, I didn't have time to finish reading the book, and so on. Even when you want to, sometimes you can't. So please be understanding that our time is precious, and we only get paid if we write books or write reviews. So understand that maybe there's a reason we can't do this thing for you, even if we want to.
All right, what about you, Michael? Do you have any recommendations for etiquette if someone wants to approach you to do a book review?
Be polite, which with indies, a lot of them are gushingly polite. They're effusively, they want to get their book reviewed, so they're very very accommodating. However, if we've told you, we're only going to review the thing if we think it's good, and you don't hear back from us in a month, 2 months, don't email back unless you're ready to hear some hard stuff. I've had, most people haven't. I've had exactly one person do that, and I said, okay, I read 40 pages into your book, and there were 4 lines of dialogue. I'm sorry, this just wasn't going to make it.
Oh.
And this was a guy, the book looked like it could have been sitting next to any Big 5 publishing house. Beautifully designed cover, beautifully designed logo for the imprint. I mean, I thought this guy had a deal somewhere. Like he was just on some off, like, small imprint or something. And like the plot was really good. He clearly did a lot of his research. There were so many things that were like almost there. But by the time I reached a point in the story where this guy's wife, who we never heard about how they met or dated or fell in love or anything, he comes home one day and he finds his wife. They live in this, he's like a marine biologist. She's a nurse. He finds his wife at home, and there's a smuggler with a gunshot wound holding her at gunpoint, making her tend to his wounds. And I'm like, I don't care.
I'm already bored.
There's a 40 pages in. I don't care. And so I kind of, like, as politely as I could, I explained to him why.
Usually that's the
problems I had with all this. And I said, but good luck and everything. But, it's like, if you follow up, you're going to get it, man.
What about you, Steve? Was there any way? I mean, sounds like you dealt with more of the publishers than the authors, right?
It was both. With publishers, it wasn't a big deal. They kind of understood, like, either
job for them.
They're just like, yeah, whatever. But if it was the author, then oftentimes an author would petition the publisher to have their book sent to me. And that was always a little dangerous for the author, not so much for me. They would, I had more than
hurt some feelings.
I had more than a few times where the author would contact me and say, hey, my publisher sent you my book, and da. These from the major publishers. And I'd say, that's great. Cool. If we really like it, we'll review it. If not, then, good luck. And, it probably just wasn't our thing, It's not you, it's me sort of a thing. Right. And
Do you feel like we should take that tack though? Like if they're doing something wrong, shouldn't we tell them rather than be like, kind of like, hey, I know nobody wants to be mean, but like,
I'm not your editor.
True, fair enough.
I ain't your editor.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Although in the case where I'm asked to be, then you're going to get it with both barrels. And the reality is, I would always tell people up front in those situations, or when a small author or an independent author would ask me for a review or a critique or whatever, and I'd say, okay, that's fine, I can do that, but here's what you're going to get. And if you're not prepared for any of these things, then perhaps it's best if I don't read it, because my time's valuable. And if I feel like you wasted my time, we're going to have an issue. Or, and I've been burned more than a few times, which is typically why I don't do it anymore. Plus, again, Tony Weisskopf would probably rather me write a novel or something, because, she's my boss. Therefore, I captain. So, but at the end of the day, it costs you nothing to be professional. And so if you're going to, so if that's for us as reviewers and for people approaching reviewers, that mentality is the same.
What about you, Ben? Have you been approached by authors, and if so, do you have any recommendations that haven't been said?
I mean, by and large, I'm going to agree with everything that's already been said, and I certainly have been approached by individual authors, and I think for me, the most important things is just kind of really setting those clear expectations, like Steve is laying out, of like, hey, if you want this is what this means. Here's how this is going to go down. This is what my time is worth to me, and here's how I'm going to respond to you. So the thing that's, I think, real hard is that sometimes, authors who are trying to break in and they're trying to get some buzz around their book, and they'll badger you, I think is a word I would use, is because they just want it so bad, and they believe in this book that they've written, and whether it's good or not is almost irrelevant. After I've gotten the 15th or 20th email, it's like, okay, stop. Like, let's take a step back, and this has gone too far. And that gets a little hard, of like trying to walk somebody back from that can be a little challenging sometimes, because it's really crossed that professionalism line. Probably don't even know where the line is anymore at that point.
What line?
Okay.
When it's clear that they don't want you to tell them what you think, they want you to tell them how much you loved it.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's especially hard with friends, right, Jody?
Yeah. Yes.
That one's rough. That one's really rough. In those cases, I usually just lie.
One of the worst things about criticism that I've learned from me is that the stuff that stings is usually where the truth lies, and the stuff you really need to listen to. And if you don't develop that as a writer, to be able to take that in and channel it into something constructive towards your work, this just might not be the game for you.
You'll never get better.
Right.
Right.
So I guess I was lucky. My mom was my first drill sergeant, and then 8.5 years in the infantry beat out any emotions I had left. So, like, just bring it on. I'm good. But I know some authors I've met are very sensitive creatures, and so yeah, you do have to to understand sometimes where those people are coming from. But I tried to keep it to an hour. I failed by a half. But before we let you guys go, can you tell listeners where they can find you? And we'll start with you, Ben.
Sure thing. My website is benespen.com. As you can see right here on the screen, it's pretty easy. You look for my name and you'll find me. I'm the only one.
And as usual, I will throw all those links in the show notes, dear listener. So if you don't want to write it down and memorize, you just scroll down and check those out. But Jody, what's the best place for someone to find you?
You can find me on Facebook, Jody Lynn Nye, and I have a website, jodylynnye.com and jodynye.com, and I think they have obtained for me jodynye.net. So give it a try. It's 3 Y's and 3 N's, so go for it. I have a Twitter handle, but I am almost never on Twitter, and with the current falderall, I doubt I'll ever go back.
Okay. What about you, Michael? How can listeners find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Missing Byline, or you can reach out to me at upstreamreviews.substack.com, where you can see my columns and my body of work and reach me there.
Okay. And Steve, what about you? Where can listeners find you on the wild, wild interwebs?
Oh, the face Twitters and the Twitter books and all those places. The usual suspects, right? You can also
He doesn't want to be found.
I know. I'm too busy murdering people in my basement or something. Horror author.
Research.
You guys have Google. You'll figure it out.
Or you can grab me over at the Writer Dojo. We have a special Facebook group over there.
Yeah.
And that's the Writing Advice podcast that Larry
that is a
and
great
I host.
podcast.
Yeah, it is.
You guys do a great podcast, by the way. Yeah.
That's the danger, I think.
I was just gonna say one day my website will be fixed and finished. But the guy building it's having a day. So
I imagine you have a slightly different relationship with your readers, given you write horror versus some of the fluffier feel good stuff. There's a few memes floating around about Stephen King and why he never wants to meet his fans. So I can sympathize with your audience being a little different than mine.
Yeah, just a little bit. Actually, the vast majority of my audience overlaps with Larry's, and so it's all Shooty McShootertons and Murder McMurdertons, and so it's like the Hatfields and McCoys. But it's all good. It's all good.
Okay. And you can find us, dear listener, over on our social medias. We have Twitter at twitter.com/SF_fantasy_show, Sierra Foxtrot _fantasy_show. You can email us at blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. Again, blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. You can find us on Facebook, where all the shenanigans happen, at facebook.com/groups/Blasters and Blades Podcast. Again, /groups/Blasters and Blades Podcast. We have a website over at anchor.fm/Blasters Tech and Tech Blades. Again, anchor.fm/Blasters and Blades, where you can support the show for as little as 99 cents a month. You can help keep the lights on. Or you can support the show more directly over at buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Again, buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Be sure to put in the comment section that is for the podcast. And I promise I will keep my co-hosts, Doc Cisca and Nick Garber, duly caffeinated. They will drink until their liver explodes. And with that, thank you for spending some of your precious time with us. For the aforementioned Nick Garber and Doc Cisca, I am J.R. Handley, and this was the Blasters and Blades Podcast. We'll be back next week at the same time, where we'll indulge our love of nerd culture, cheesy jokes, and all things that go boom, because I like Shooty McShooterface. Thank you guys all for coming. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much.